So good evening everyone, and thanks for coming out tonight. I just want to welcome you all to this talk, which is part of the inaugural Orkney Archaeology Festival. Am I not? Is that better? Sorry, right. So I just welcome you all to this talk this evening, which is part of the inaugural Orkney Archaeology Festival, the first of many to come, we hope. So in February last year, a schoolboy was walking on a beach in Sanday when he came across some timbers that had been washed up during a storm and appeared to be from a shipwreck. So residents of the islands alerted the authorities, and Wessex Archaeology was commissioned by Historic Environment Scotland to undertake rapid assessment, recording and dendrochronological, that's easy for some to say.
It's just dendro, just say dendro.
Dendro, yeah, everybody knows what that is. Assessment and sampling of a section of the wooden wreck. Just over 18 months later, we know lots more about the life of these timbers than that schoolboy could have imagined on that day when he found them on that beach in Sanday. So tonight we've got Ben Saunders here from Wessex Archaeology, and he'll be providing some fascinating insights into how the wreck was identified from those timbers. So if we'd just like to welcome Ben, thanks very much.
Thank you guys very much. That's very kind. Get the clapping out of the way early. Move on. So yeah, this just to go through. This is going through the work we've been doing over the last 18 months or so to try to identify and learn more about the wreck that came up on the sands of Edderby in Sanday in February last year. It's been a collaborative bit of work. I'm the one chatting about it, which is very nice for me. But there's been tons of work by tons of different people, different organisations. I will thank them at the end of the project, but it has been a huge amount of work by a huge number of people, and I'd like to thank them all very, very much. So, as Maura was just saying, the wreck came up on the sands of Edderby in February 2024, found by Alfie F. Daffith when he was out on a run. We think it's likely to have been buried within mobile sands above the high tide line, or what became above the high tide line, rather than washed up, just because of the completeness and the position it was. But the reason it became exposed was probably because there was an extended period of unusual wind direction which built up the waves enough to remove that sand. And there was a couple of blowouts of the dunes further down as well, which Trish Thorne told me about at the same time. So we think it's probably due to a large amount of sediment removal because of these sort of additional stormy conditions. At that point, there was a discussion about whether it was worth recovering or whether it would rebury itself. A lot of these wrecks in the intertidal tend to rebury themselves, and that is the safest place for them. It's complex and expensive to deal with historic ship timber, particularly historic ship timber that's been subsea or in salt water for quite some time. The section itself was roughly 10 metres by 5 metres overall, and overall weighed about somewhere between 10 and 12 tonnes worth of oak. So difficult to remove from anywhere, let alone a bit of beach without a lot of roads to go into it. Although we were very fortunate to have a small number of sandy tractors and farmers with telehandlers who were able to come and recover it. But the problem with it is that recovery also means that you've got the potential for damaging the material, while rebury would just cover it over again, and then we come and have a look at it in a decent amount of time. Nature, however, took its own decision and started to break the wreck apart, started to move down the beach, and started to shed timbers. So we were able to deploy rapidly. Myself and Hamish Dara from Dendro Chronicle came up on, I think, 2 days' notice. And thanks to the help of Raymond Brown, James Muir and Adam Towery and their telehandlers, we were able to disassemble the wreck, record it in situ before disassembling it, take it apart, and then recover it back to Sandy Heritage Centre. They should have been doing their fire service training, but they were very happy to come and do this and then go to their fire service training afterwards. And I massively thank them for that. We then did a really quite long shift of trying to get all the timbers labelled up, a summary of their condition, a summary of their overall shape and dimensions, this sort of stuff, trying to check for diagnostic elements of the timbers to give us a better idea of what the ship could have been. And also then cutting some of them up with a chainsaw to recover 19 samples for dendrochronology. And that was the really important, that was going to give us the idea about what this ship could be. That's going to give us the dates, that's going to give us all the information we can get from it, because it is almost entirely just timber as opposed to anything else. And at that point, we went back to Edinburgh with the samples and put together an interim assessment report for HES, who had funded this first chunk. It also went to Sandy Heritage Group and to Orkney Islands Council as well. And then it was very clear that this was some sort of significant wreck. It is a really heavily built, chunky bit of ship, nicely put together. The timbers are good quality. So we were engaged in a series of funding applications to other groups, both ourselves from Wessex and Orkney Islands Council, Nick Hewitt at the museums team. And we also, over the course of the summer, one of the things we really wanted to bring home to them was that this is not just a wreck that we're working on, it's a wreck that is part of Sandy, it's part of Sandy's heritage, and therefore it is worthwhile training people up on recording wrecks, because there's likely to be more potentially coming up. And it's interesting, it gets people excited about the heritage. So we spent the summer doing further training workshops thanks to North Isles Landscape Partnership Scheme. And that included wreck, timber recording, photogrammetry and aerial imagery. And then also some workshops in conservation, Orkney wrecks and Orkney folklore as well throughout the summer. At the same time, Nick was doing his application for the stabilisation tank to National Heritage Memorial Fund, and we were doing our application to HES for the additional bits of research and the dating itself. So in September, we were very fortunate. The National Heritage Memorial Fund application was successful. Whacking great stainless steel tank was built in Kirkwall by Waterfront Group and then transported to Sandy and installed next to the Heritage Centre. And then we that's on a telehandler again, lifted the samples and the timbers into the tank, and that's in fresh water, which helps the desalination of the timbers. You can't do the next stage of conservation, which is when you start replacing the water in the wood cells with a wax polyethyl glycerine glycol PEG, and with salt in the timbers. So you have to desalinize the timbers first, and that also stabilizes them. That just keeps them in stasis and not breaking down anymore. At the same time, in November we were successful with the HES grant, and the aims of that were to, first of all, we're going to complete the dendro assessment and work out which timbers are actually worth dating. Are the samples all good? Then from that, do the analysis of those timbers. I say we, that was Dr. Coralie Mills at Dendro Chronicle, who did a fantastic job with it. We're going to then do a little bit more work on the timbers themselves, try to see if we can find out more information about them and the information they can give us about the woodland they were growing in, the conversion from tree to timber. We're also going to do some more research into ship construction and design for comparison of other ships around there. We're going to do more research work into researching wrecks within Sandy, around Sandy, and then further archive searches. And all that comes down to, can we work out which ship it is? And I don't want to spoil it for those who didn't see all the newspaper stuff in July, but we have worked out, we think, which ship it is. So what we're trying to do basically is becoming wreck detectives. We are taking what we know about the ship and comparing that to other pieces of evidence to see whether a ship could be this wreck. What we know about the ship, it's from a wooden vessel. It's not from an iron or steel vessel. We will have the date of the timbers. We'll have the location of the wreck within the Bay of Newark, Bay of Loch Ness on the east side of Sandy. We've got an idea of the size and construction of the vessel. It's a bit less certain because it is a very specific part of the lowest part of the hull of the ship. But we can get a rough idea of sizes coming out of that. And then we've also very fortunate to have a really extensive wreck corpus from Sandy, thanks to the work of Alan Braby and Myra on the island as well. It's really, really fantastic resource to have. What we haven't got, there's no cargo material, there's no associated artifacts, there's no metalwork, there's no cannons, there's no material that would actually tell you this is definitely this wreck without having to go through the timbers themselves. Cannons are really useful because they tend to have makers' marks and stamps and that sort of stuff. Artifacts give you an idea of where the ship might have been coming from, what it's carrying. We haven't got any of that, any associated proxy evidence. We've just got the timbers, the structure of them within the hull. and their dimensions. So to introduce the wreck itself, like I say, 10 by 5 metre section, fairly together, quite solid. There are 11 floors, which are these, where's the pointer? There's the pointer. The floors are the lowest framing timbers in the hull. They're the ones that go across the keel there. 25 of the first futtocks, so the futtocks are the timbers in the frame that build up the side of the ship. We've got one piece of keel, which is this one along here. And then we've also got 18 external hull planks and 17 internal planks, which are called ceiling planks, because that's what people who build ships like to call them. It doesn't make sense in the end. They're fastened together with trennels, which are wooden pegs, wooden dowels that go between them. Wrought iron bolts that hold the keel to the floor timbers themselves. So you can just about sort of see, maybe I can. There are holes here and here and here. They're for iron bolts that go through the keel and attach it to the floor. And there's no lateral fastenings at all between the framing elements whatsoever. So they're entirely held together by the sandwiching of the planks rather than any connection between them themselves. Hamish Dara did some work on the timbers themselves. It's likely they came from a managed woodland. You can see this from the tree ring growth and also the way that they've grown. Particularly the floor timbers are growing from a bit of woodland where you've got space around a tree but not too much, so they're growing fairly straight with a bit of curve on them. Whereas the futtocks, because they need the curve in that to create the curve of the hull, they're probably coming from trees that are more sort of hedgerow based or individual trees that have more time to spread and move on. The floor timbers are usually being cut down somewhere about 80, 90 years into their lives. The futtocks are coming from much older trees, 120, 150 years or so. On the keel piece here, on that end, we think we can see a scarf joint, which is where the two timbers overlap as a join. And that gives us an idea that because the scarf is going that way, that is the bow, because you don't want water flowing into the joint, so you put the joint going back that way. So that way is the bow on this ship, we think. So that, if you flip that way up, that's the port side. Is that right? That's the starboard side. That's the port side. It's a 50-50 chance as to whether I got that right or not. I can't remember. Like I say, they are connected by two wrought iron bolts. There's not copper bolts. They are wrought iron, and there's no lateral fastenings. I've said that already. On the planking, there's no evidence for scarf joints. Again, there's no overlapping ones, apart from one possible repair right at the very end, but it's not a proper scarf joint. Everything is butt joints. They're just butting up against each other like that. Again, very few metal fastenings. There are some nail holes in the outside, which haven't got nails in. We think that's because they are from potentially at this point in time for ships that are traveling into the tropics where you have more aggressive shipworm, Teredo nivalis. You cover your oak planking, which is expensive and hard. You cover that with a softer pine planking or fir planking, and that gets eaten by the worms. And they don't eat your oak planking. After a couple of years, you strip it off, you put new planking on top of it, potentially with copper at the top, not absolutely certain. The hull and ceiling planks have been fastened at the same time, so the trennels are going through both at the same point. And we've got some evidence for nail holes within the planking, which could be that sheathing. The fastenings themselves, the trennels, are quite nice. They are mostly, we think, driven from outboard to inboard, but it's not absolutely certain. The idea is basically they swell up when they get into water and they pull all the planks really tightly together and hold it all really tight and keep the ship together. They've got these quite nice, this is an example of Dutch shipbuilding from A.B. Hoving and Nicholas Witsen's treatise. On the inside of the trennel, on the inboard side, you've got a full width wedge splaying out the trennel. And on the outside, you've got this little square peg called a dottle, and that's pushed in to again splay out the edge and just really pull everything together. It's quite nice to see that sort of difference between them. We've also got evidence for how they're converting these timbers from tree to timber themselves. We've got adze marks, axe marks, chisel, saw marks and drill marks going across different parts of the ship. These quite I'll use the pointer. These little curve marks here are adze blade marks, which is one of the typical tools of the shipbuilding trade, where you're trying to cut something down to make it into a slightly more complicated shape. We've also got axe marks on some of the floor timbers, saw marks on the planks where they're being sawn not quite at right angles to the plank, which suggests it's the two big two-person saws. And then we've also got these indentations at the end of the timbers, which are probably from these timber dogs, which are used to move the timber around in the yard or drag them around. And then finally, really pleasingly, when we were initially recording the timbers, two of the volunteers from Sandy found that top one. These are on the inside, they're on the face of the plank facing into the framing timbers from the internal ceiling planks. And these are marks that are cut into the face of the planks, probably not when they are planks, probably when they are a full bulk of timber. And they are to do with quantities and qualities of timber, we think. This double arrow with crosses in it is potentially an individual merchant's personal mark. And then everything else is to do with quantities and sizes and dimensions of timber, we think. They're much better known during the 19th century, particularly with timber coming from the Baltic, but we think this is British timber or English timber marks coming through at a relatively early stage, which is quite cool at the same time. So the dendro results we have from Coralie, everything was oak, or all the timbers that we looked at were oak. We've got our latest definite felling date of spring 1762, and latest of 1762 spring, earliest of 1748 spring again. And what we tend to find is a lot of timbers are being felled in the spring or in the late winter when the sap has fallen to its lowest level. The other timbers, you've got a range of dates within that because you haven't quite got up to bark edge on the timber. So dendrochronology works by measuring the different ring widths across the timber and comparing it to regional chronologies around the world, around the area you're looking in. And if you don't have all the way to the edge of the tree, you're obviously going to lose a few years of that tree's life. Some of these where it says B or BS, that means it's got to bark edge, so it's got to the last season that tree was alive before it got cut down. If it hasn't got that, it's potentially got additional years it could have been growing within that. So on this chart, the white bit is the heartwood of the timber and the grey is the sapwood. You usually have somewhere between 20 to 40 years. Coralie can tell me I'm wrong about that at some point. I think it's 20 to 40 years of sapwood depending on the oak growth. So potential for some of these ones, particularly the planking, to extend into the 1780s, but we can't be sure about that because we haven't got the exact dates, because we haven't got the bark edge on that. All the timber is coming from matching with chronologies from southern and southwestern England, but it's not matching to one chronology, which suggests that it's coming from multiple forests and it's coming from multiple areas within that area, or those two areas. And that's interesting because it's also quite a wide date range, which would suggest there's repairs going on that we're not necessarily able to see within the wreck itself. So from that, we can get an idea of the earliest dates of sinking and the construction. The earliest date from the dendro, the ship cannot have sunk before then. All of that timber was heavily connected. It's all part of the thing. You're not in a site where you get timbers washing in and becoming part of it. Everything was connected to that bit of wreck. So that has to be the earliest date that ship can sink. You're also then potentially adding on a bit of time for construction or repair, and you're potentially adding on a bit of time for seasoning of that wood as well. They do less of seasoning, or they don't have the quantity of oak they need to season things properly, particularly for shipbuilding, during the 7 Years' War, 1756 to 1763. So there is a possibility that wood could have gone directly into a ship very soon after being cut down, but you usually are wanting to add a bit of time in for seasoning because otherwise the wood starts to warp and move around. So 1764 is the earliest year that this ship can sink. Everything before that, they're out as candidates. They're not part of it. If we want to then take an idea of a latest likely date, it's a bit more complicated. Wooden ships can be used for a long time. If you look at some of the shipping registers, there's still ships from the 1760s being used in 1820, 1830. Not many, and they are knackered, but there are a very small number. You also potentially would see evidence for that long life in the timbers. You'd potentially see repair timbers coming through. You'd expect to see timbers from the early 19th century if it was lasting through, but we want to be conservative about this. We want to have the net as wide as possible for candidates for this ship, so we're going to give it a decent length through. We've gone for 75 years from the average felling date, which was 1755-ish, so that takes us to 1830. So anything sunk after 1830, we're ignoring it, we're getting rid of it, we're saying it's not a candidate. Realistically, that's quite late. I think anything probably after 1810 is a bit too late, but I want to make sure we've got as much as we possibly can to try and get the candidate. What we then want to do is have a look at comparisons of ship construction. We're going to look at examples from discovered wrecks where we have them, where they've been well recorded, and where they've been published, which is a difficult combination. There's not a huge number, but there are some. We're going to look at shipbuilding treaties from the time. There's a really fantastic selection of different shipbuilding treaties from this time. People are starting to get really interested in writing down what they're doing and why they're doing what they're doing. And also people are getting really interested in going and finding out what other people are doing and writing that down for their government. So you've got this fantastic naval treaty by a French shipwright called Blaise of Olivier, who it's not officially spying, but it is spying. And he goes and wanders around the English and Dutch naval yards for a few years after the end of the 7 Years' War, but before the start of the Napoleonic conflict. Oh, sorry, before the 7 Years' War, but after one of the other wars that they were in with France. And writes things down. He is loosely arrested a couple of times, and then he ends up in the goes to the Chatham dockyard master's house for some wine, and you think this is not really getting arrested, but fine, you do what you do. He gets some lovely pictures of English ships and goes back to France and tells them what they're doing wrong, and they ignore him. We've also got examples from historical records of different ships being built and why they were built. We've got a fantastic resource within the National Maritime Museum in Greenwich of surviving naval vessel plans, which again are just starting to come in at this point. They're starting to survive from this point, from sort of 1764 onwards. Very lucky with the date of the ship. If it had been earlier, it would have been a nightmare. We've also got some ship models, which is quite nice as well, usually within the NMN as well. And then if all else fails, we've got some paintings of ships. Slightly problematic, because if they're painting the bit of ship that we're looking at, that ship has got into deep trouble. But we have got an idea of how they're building ships from those as well. And what we can start to do is start to build an idea of what the size of this vessel was. The wreck staff itself, I've said this several times, but I'm going to say it again, 10 meters by 5. There's very little change in the width of the timbers. There's very little change in the shape of the timbers to come up towards either the bow or the stern. So you've got right in the middle of the vessel. This piece is the very lowest part of the hull, and it's right in the middle of the hull of the ship itself. It's only just starting at one end to start to curve up to form into probably the bow. So you're looking at roughly, I'm going to move that pointer so it's not taking that out. There we go. Roughly another 5 meters at least on top of that to take you to the bow, and then double that for the full length of the ship with a few extra bits and bobs. An estimation of somewhere between 25 to 35 meters in length. And if you want that in the dimensions they would have been using, it's 82 to 114 feet. The beam of the vessel, the width of the vessel, we've got 4.5 meters just of the floors. They are all roughly 4.5 meters long. And then another bit extra because of the bits of the futtocks that stick out. So 5 meters width overall that we have preserved. But again, this is the very flattest part of the ship. So you're going to expect to see some curve on the hull coming beyond there. Width for the curve, we reckon somewhere about another 2.5 meters on each side. And that takes you to somewhere between 8 to 10 meters of beam, somewhere between 26 to 33 feet. From that, we can start to look at how big the ship would have been in terms of tonnage, which is what a lot of ships get discussed as in this time. And there's a standardization coming through based out of London, as many standardizations are, that sets tonnage by builder's measurement, or tons BM at this point. And what it does is it takes the length of the ship and the beam of a ship and applies a series of different calculations to it, and you end up with the tonnage BM of a ship. We did that with those various sizes that we had there, and in terms of the smallest tonnage the vessel is likely to be is about 200 tons, maybe a wee bit more, and the largest is somewhere about 800 tons, which is quite a sizable vessel. Those are both quite extreme versions of that. You'd have to be taking the very extreme length and width of the ship. So you're actually probably looking at something somewhere between 250, 300 up to about 600 tons. And also we know from what we're seeing that it's a heavily constructed ship, that the framing is close together, there's not a lot of gaps. The room and space between the timbers is about 24 inches, which is quite a nice size. So it's not a vernacular shipping vessel, it's not a small coastal vessel, trading vessel. It's either something that's built heavily for a reason, either because it's trading in heavy materials or because it's being built to be very strong. Not going to say warship, I'm just going to think it really loudly. So when we then start to look at the assumptions we make about this when we're looking at the wreck corpus within Sandy, and the reasons I think these are reasonable assumptions, we're assuming that this wreck was wrecked in Sandy and not elsewhere before this piece was brought to Sandy, or the wreck was brought to Sandy and then broken apart. That assumption means that basically that if it was wrecked somewhere else and brought to Sandy, that has not been recorded. And I think that's a reasonable assumption. We see a lot of wrecks being recorded this time. We do hear about wrecks being moved around the islands, but that gets recorded. And we're also assuming that it is material from a wreck that has been reported and has become part of the historical record. And again, the wreck corpus in Sandy is pretty good. The size of this vessel and the amount of money that they would have got from the salvage of it suggests that it's something that should have been recorded in at least some capacity. And some of the vessels we're seeing coming through in the wreck corpus are considerably smaller and considerably less valuable than this one would have been. But they are still assumptions. Everything could be wrong. But I think they're quite reasonable assumptions to make. And if we hadn't have found a candidate for this wreck, I think we would have had to go back to this and say, actually, this has not survived in the historical record. We have a ship that we just don't know what it is. But because we do have a candidate and it does work, we're going to make these assumptions, say these assumptions are reasonable. That is a list of some of the shipwrecks in Sandy. We're very, very fortunate in that over the course of the last 30, 40 years, there's been tons of work into shipwrecks in and around Sandy, starting with Alan Braby's work in the 1990s and then carried through by the Sandy Heritage Group over the course of the last 20 years or so. And this is my colour scheme of working out which ships are not the wreck. So red means they're too early, blue means they're the wrong size and from the wrong place, green means that they are wrecked in the wrong bit of Sandy, and purple means that they're foreign vessels and probably built of foreign oak. So the basis for this work was Alan Braby's Sandy Shipwreck Survey that he did in the 90s. That, with a little bit of additional stuff from the Sandy Heritage Group and from work we did at the time, comes up to 268 wrecks, which is a colossal number of wrecks for, even though Sandy is the centre of the world, it's still a lot of wrecks for that. They span, in terms of the historical record, they span from 1500 through to 1973 with the loss of a fishing boat. And they are a range of vessels from small inter-island craft, fishing vessels, large merchant vessels, warships, and they're coming from all over Northern Europe. They're coming from England, Scotland, Orkney, North America, all over the world. Some of them strand, so they go ashore and then are recovered back and salvaged off as a complete ship. Some are completely wrecked and smashed to pieces. And this has all come together from a range of archive sources that Alan looked at and then we have also added to. And I say we, I mean the wreck researchers who've done a huge amount of work over the last 6 months alongside my colleagues and Alan to bring all this material together. Where does the Sandy Shipwreck Survey get it from? It got a lot from a wide range of sources. Arcams, RIP, Canmore, RIP, Trove. Got it from Orkney archives as well, and lots of other local smaller archives which have ship registers from this period going back to the 1760s sometimes in them. Admiralty court records are really, really useful. The archive's got some fantastic Admiralty court records where people go and argue about who owns what from salvage and from wreck. Old statistical account of Scotland and other written sources like the fee diaries from Sanday as well. He tends to note down, had my breakfast, saw a shipwreck, had my lunch. Well, fair enough. It seems like it's a relatively common occurrence at that point. You've also got the British Newspaper Archive, which goes back to the 1740s in some cases. Aberdeen Journal is incredibly interested in shipping losses in particular, and so reports a lot of them. You've also got Lloyd's List, Lloyd's other bits and bobs as well. Alan also wrote to a lot of museums and organisations around Northern Europe to try and get information about particularly ships in the Baltic, ships from Northern Germany and the Netherlands as well. And he also did some site survey in around Sanday as well to try and identify ship timbers within fence lines and in buildings as well. But what was missing from this at that time, he didn't have access to all the details from Lloyd's Register of Shipping, which begins in 1764. And for the first 10 years, there's a lot of missing editions, and there's one, I think it's 1770, that starts at M. So if your ship is named between A and L, it's not in it. So it's a little bit annoying. It wasn't online in the 90s. It only was digitized by Lloyd's Register Foundation about 10 years ago, and it is an amazing resource. We'll go into what we got out of it in a bit, but it's fantastic. And it tells you an awful lot about the vessels themselves. There wasn't a lot of material from National Maritime Museum, from the National Archive, because again, some of those records hadn't been sent across the National Archives at that point. Other archives we've contacted have digitized much more of their collections by this point, and they're getting a lot more information that we can use easily without having to go to the huge number of archives across the UK that have information about ships. One thing that has come out of this project is how important local archives are to this sort of research. Without local archivists who know their collections really well, we would have been scuppered. And there's so much information in local archives that you can get from this sort of thing, and they're such a vital resource. But anyway, because of that, community researchers were able to add in tons of information about the individual vessels, find out where they're from, find out what they were doing, find out where they were trading, and sort of narrow them down to say, right, this ship's built in the wrong place, this ship's not right. Why are there so many shipwrecks in Sanday? Just a quick diversion onto this. The Aberdeen Journal, in a particularly purple bit of prose, describes it as the cradle of shipwreck in Scotland. There's just tons, and they know it's dangerous. The chart on the first slide is a chart made by Murdo Mackenzie in 1750, who's a North Ronaldsman, and he becomes Scotland's first hydrographer and invents a series of amazing tools to do hydrographic survey in 1750, and he chooses to map North Ron and the North Isles of Orkney because it is such a dangerous place to sail, and he knows it, and he wants to make sure people are staying safe. Sanday itself, as many people know here, it's a low-lying island. You're not necessarily going to see it very easily. If it's big and choppy in the waves and you're desperately trying to sail through the Faroe Isle Gap, you're not necessarily going to see Sanday. There's frequent poor weather, particularly during the the autumn and spring gales. And there's a rapid change from deep water. Out here, you're happily sailing about in 20 meters, and then suddenly here you're into 7 meters. And if you get onto the Bargruna, which is this little reef here, I'll do that. It's here's 20 meters, here's 7 meters, and here's the Bargruna reef where you're into 1 meter and you've lost the bottom of your ship completely. Lots of fogs, lots of storms. It's also on a very busy shipping route. It's a really important shipping route for getting out at the top of the North Sea. And Orkney at this point is massively connected. It's only really with the coming of road transport being what we all expect, that you start to shift away from sea transport being the major way people get around and how people shift about. Orkney being based at the bottom of the Faroe Isle Passage, it's used by the Baltic nations and the North Sea countries as well as a way to get out into the North Atlantic enough and trade with the rest of the world, or fight with the rest of the world, or do whatever they want to do. And that's because the English Channel is so frequently closed by conflict or by rivalries or by the French or by the English, whoever it is. Someone gets grumpy, they close the English Channel, everyone has to go at the top. It's also used quite a lot by traders from the west of Britain, particularly Liverpool, Cumbria, and the Clyde, and also traders from Wales, Ireland, to go over the top of Scotland and out into the Baltic, or into the southern North Sea that way as well. So we get quite a lot of ships that are based out of Liverpool, quite a lot of ships that are based out of Whitehaven, Maryport, sorry, in Cumbria. And then you also have quite a lot of ships coming out of the east coast ports and up into the Greenland whale fishery. But there's not a lot of vessels operating from southern ports that tend to come past Orkney unless they are doing it for a very specific purpose. So it's interesting that this ship is built out of southern timber. The ownership of wreck is based around the material being on your land at this point, largely. Sandy had a few very extensive landowners who also were very keen to take that bounty and claim that money that they could. So what happens is a wreck comes onto the foreshore, you drag it above the high tide line onto your land, or more likely you pay somebody to do that, or you get your tenants to do that for you, and that belongs to you. So once the wreck is on your land and above the high tide line, it's yours. You can claim the salvage money for it. You can either claim the money for salvaging it back from the owners, or you get permission to sell that material. The old statistical accounts does note there's some small-scale pilfering of material from wreck sites as opposed to big chunks. The vast majority of the valuable material is either, if it's heavy, left in which is wrecked on the way back from, is that better? Yeah. It was wrecked on the way back from Hamburg with a cargo of fabric and cotton, and the laird gets his tenants to take it to the winnowing barn and dry it all out, because it will cost, he'll be able to sell it for more money when it's dried. If you survive your wrecking set, then actually Sandy is a pretty good place to get wrecked. Still is. It has records being looking after people really very well. William Clouston, the minister in Sandy and North Ron in 1793, who writes the reports on the parishes for the old statistical account, talks about a captain who was wrecked there in 1774, saying, if I was to be wrecked anywhere again, I would wish it was on the Isle of Sandy. And part of it is because it's quite sandy. You tend to get ashore. You're not smashed to pieces on the rocks. You're not broken up. The ship doesn't get broken up too easily. And so a lot of people do survive, and the people of Sandy are known for looking after wrecked sailors, unless they're Dutch, and only then if they are from the Utrecht and are sort of at war with everyone. So it's understandable that they weren't quite so kind to the survivors of the Utrecht, but they are generally seen as a good place to be wrecked. If you're going to be wrecked anywhere, Sandy. So, speaking of being wrecked in Sandy, when we want to cut down the more options for the wreck, it is a big piece of wreck. We don't think it would have moved too far from where it was wrecked unless it had floated round, and the centre of a vessel tends to sink when it's the bow and the stern that will bob about and float on. So what we said was, right, we will continue to keep anything that is noted to wreck between start point up here, anywhere in the Bay of Knockness, anywhere in the Bay of Newark, down to Tresness. And if it's recorded as being wrecked anywhere else in Sandy, whether it's Cattletoft, which quite a few were, or Stove, or over on the Riv, or up in Otterswick, if it's recorded in those places, it's unlikely to have made it round to here unless that report then said we've moved it round to the Bay of Newark, which they don't do because moving wrecked ships is a nightmare. It does mean we keep wrecks that just say we were wrecked in Sandy. They could have been wrecked anywhere in the island. Again, we're keeping the net quite wide. It also means we keep ships that are wrecked on start point, but they might have been wrecked on the north side, or they're wrecked on Tresness, but they might have been wrecked on the south side. Doesn't matter, we're keeping the lot, and we have actually then gone back and made sure that none of the other wrecks around the island could match with the timbers either, and they don't, which is fortunate because it would have been difficult to explain why if they had. We're going to start bringing in, at this point, we're going to start bringing in more data about the ships, and this is really can bring it through from Lloyd's Register Shipping and from individual harbour registers as well, where we can find them. We want to know the home port, the port construction, ideally. We want to know why it's in Orkney, what trade routes it's going on, what's going on with its sort of background and its history. What's the function of the ship? And then potentially also, is it a prize? Has it been captured in conflict? Has it been reflagged to a new nation? And therefore, actually, when you see it's a Dutch ship, it wasn't Dutch built, it's actually been captured. And we want to try and get a bit of a biography of the ships that we're seeing within the corpus. And we're doing this mostly through Lloyd's Register. Lloyd's Register is fantastic because what it does, it tells you the name of a ship, it tells you what sort of ship, so S means ship, it's fair. BG means brig. It's all this to do with mast layout and sail plans. That bit is the captain's name. That's the tonnage in this column, and some information about build as well there. That's where it was built, so that'll be Virginia in America. There'll be some information about potential repairs and stuff in there as well. That's the year it's built in, and years of repair. That's the owners. That's the depth in the hold, in feet of the hold, so how big the hold of the ship is. And that's information about its trade route. So LI is the shortening of Liverpool, and Dansk is the shortening of Danzig, or Gdansk in Poland now. And then this is information about its insurance details. So if it dings your car, you can find out what's going on. This is not easy sometimes, as you can see there. This is just a small clip of all of the Bettys that are registered as ships in 1775, so 1776. That goes on for 7 pages. It is a nightmare. There is no equity rule for ships. You can have hundreds of them. And there are certain ships that have very popular names, and unsurprisingly, there are quite a lot of wrecks with those names because there's lots of those ships being built and named. So what you have to start doing is try and cut them down. If it's the wrong sort of ship, if it's the wrong date, if it's the wrong captain's name, potentially you've got that recorded within the information about the wreck. You might have information about where it was going to and from, which you can match against what's going on here. But it's also important to remember ships at this time are living quite complex lives. There's not a particular concern about changing names in ships. It's not seen as unlucky. At this point, details might be missing. There's all sorts of stuff that gives you a lot of information, but it also gives you a lot of chance for missing stuff as well. So there's a lot of cross-referencing that we have to do at this time as well. And this is really what we spent the last 6 months doing, between the 20 of us or so, was going through these records and trying to find this stuff. We were very fortunate that somebody had a lot of information from the ship registers from Liverpool and was able to go through those. And that was vastly useful because a lot of these ships are based out of Liverpool and we can get a lot of information from that. We're also very lucky that the ship dating came out to when it did, because if it had been earlier, we wouldn't have any of this information. It matches them really quite nicely, and we're very, very lucky for that. So it's all made out of English oak. We know that if it's made out of English oak, it's built in England. And that is because England is not exporting any oak at this point at all. In fact, England is importing vast quantities of timber from the Baltic. It's importing from North America. It's even importing oak from the Caribbean and South America as well at this point, because they are so short of timber for the requirements they have. Some points in the 1770s, something to do around a fifth to a quarter of timber in the Royal Dockyards is non-English origin. So we know that it has to be built in England. So if you've got a ship that is built elsewhere, it's not your ship. So we can remove things like the Ingeisenheid, which was wrecked in Tresnes in 1776, Dutch owned, Dutch built. Probably made out of probably North German oak, realistically, as a lot of the Dutch ships are at that point. It's a shame it's not the Ingeisenheid. It's got a really cool story. It's got tons of archive material about it. It's really exciting. That was a disappointment, but never mind. It's not the Nancy. Wrecked in 1787 in Tresnes, operated between Liverpool and Norway. Sounds good. But built in Massachusetts in 1772. Not that ship. No North American oak in that ship. It's not the Providentia. Wrecked in Sandy, 1793. Again, Danish built, Danish owned. The Burlington. Wrecked in 1794. Home port of Bridlington in Yorkshire. but built in Finland in 1778 of fir, so not our ship. It's also built with the wrong timber, which is interesting. And then the Friendship looked like a really good bet. It is a Royal Navy hired transport of 10 guns, heavily built ship. Interesting, could be our ship. But you go through Lloyd's Register, that ship was built in Cadiz of Spanish live oak and cedar in 1797. Not our ship. Sad times. So from the 268 original candidates, we've gone through this elimination process. How have we got from that? Ships sunk before 1763, 23 of them, boom, gone. 245 left. Ships sunk after 1830, 139, mostly metal, so you can get rid of them as well. 106 left at that point. Ships that stranded or wrecked elsewhere in Sandy, other than Bay of Newark or Bay of Loch Ness, you remove 45, see that at 61. We're coming down all the time. We've lost 200 ships already. Super. Foreign registered and built ships, 24, down to 37. Ships built of other wood other than oak, 33 of them. And then the combination of ships more than 200 tons and built and registered outside of South and Southwestern England, 33. Because again, it costs a lot to move timber around. So if you are a shipbuilder who is building your ships in Liverpool, you are using northwestern English timber. If you're building your ships in Newcastle, you're using timber from the northeast of England. The ships that we're looking for are going to be built London through to Bristol and the south coast. Probably not Kent and Sussex and, probably not Kent, not East Anglia, less likely, potential but unlikely. But what we find is the vast majority of the ships that are left, after you remove all of that, are Cumbrian or from Liverpool or from West Wales, and they're not going to be being built out of southern English timber. And what you end up with at that point is just one left. And as the greatest detective in the world, Basil the Great Mouse Detective, says, and his follower over there, when you remove the impossible, what is left, however improbable, is your last ship standing. And so the last ship standing at this point, we haven't got a lot of information about it. The entry in Lloyd's Register tells us that it's a London-based whaler. It's built in a King's Yard. So King's Yard originally was just Deptford Royal Dockyard in London. It came to eventually mean the various Royal Dockyards, the 6 Royal Dockyards, Deptford, Woolwich, Sheerness, Chatham, Portsmouth, Plymouth. And it also appears to mean ships that are built by commercial operators for the Royal Navy and then commissioned in Royal Dockyards afterwards, as we'll find out. It's got no year in it. This is quite common for ships that are ex-Royal Navy in Lloyd's Register that have become mercantile vessels at this point. Either it's because the owners don't know what year it's built in, or it's because they keep it secret. It's for 500 tons. That's nice. That fits quite nicely with what we're looking at, somewhere between 300 and 600 tons. Delicious. Its loss was noted in Lloyd's list in early April 1788. The wrecking was actually in March 1788. The Aberdeen Journal also mentions its loss and says it was a frigate in the last war, which will be the American Revolutionary War. And interestingly, it's also mentioned within Sandy folklore. Water-Charles Ensign records a tale of the witchcraft related to the wreck of the Earl of Chatham. Ship Maggie, who was apparently a witch in Sandy, who wore one white boot and one black boot. The mate of the ship saw her walking along the coastline as he was being rescued and demanded his gun to shoot her because he'd seen her dancing in the masts while the ship was wrecking. And he was insistent that it wasn't their seamanship that had gone down. It must have been this woman with one white boot and one black boot. And Tom Muir did a fantastic talk about it on Tuesday, along with other folklore from around the islands as well. And it does come up in his book. But probably wasn't witchcraft that sank the ship. It probably was a storm. So we start looked at, it was a habit of, I hate to tell you this, but sometimes newspapers get it wrong. And sometimes they lie or they just don't get it right. They have a habit at this time of calling every naval vessel a frigate, depending on what they're doing, which is infuriating to anybody in the Royal Navy who gets very angry about it because They're not all frigates. So it doesn't have to be a frigate. It could be a bomb vessel, it could be a sloop, it could be a smaller vessel that's being sold out to the Royal Navy. We have quite good records of ships being sold out to the Royal Navy in the 1780s, because there's a lot of ships being sold at the end of the American Revolutionary War. So we can start to cross-check against them and see if there's any good candidates for that. We've also got the British Arctic Whaling Database, which is a fantastic resource. Cross-check the life of Earl of Chatham, try and find out more about what this ship is. We haven't actually got any information about its build date. We can't say, is it this ship or not at this point. And we can cross-check that with Lloyd's Register. What we find is it's present in both Lloyd's Register and on Lloyd's list between 1784 and 1788, 87, and it's going and whaling in the Greenland Sea and the Davis Strait out of London. And we do more archive digging as well. We're very, very fortunate in that there is this whacking great book in the National Archives. It's like that, it's colossal, it's fantastic. And that is the Board of Trade Register of London of Foreign Trade from 1787. Just in time, your beauty. And it's registering all vessels that are operating to foreign ports or in foreign waters from London, because they want to know where those vessels are, because they are worried that they might be, they have established a convoy system during the American Revolutionary War, and they protect their ships by that. They're concerned that if there's a future conflict, there might be coming up soon, that they need to convoy their ships around again. They need to know quantities and quantities of ships that are moving between different ports and where they're going. So they have a register for it. And this tells us that the Earl of Chatham was built in Chichester in West Sussex in 1749. Doesn't tell us who it's built for, doesn't tell us who built it within that area. Chichester is not a royal dockyard, whatever it wants to think about itself. The only ship that matches within Royal Naval Records being built in Chichester in 1749 is HMS Hind. HMS Hind is a 24-gun frigate from the 1745 establishment. At this point, the Royal Navy designs its frigates in chunks, and it has ways, it releases different designs in different years. This is from the 1745 one. And this is confirmed by a letter in the Admiralty Records that is the owners of the Earl of Chatham writing them to say, we need to register this ship with the Board of Trade. Can you tell us when it was built? And the Admiralty write back saying, yes, it's HMS Hind, 1749, please stop writing to us. We've sold it to you, leave us alone. And what's HMS Hind's story? So HMS Hind was built by Chitty and Vernon in their West Itchener yard between 1748 and 1749. 1748 is a good year, because that's also when our timber was cut down. Yes, success. That matches nicely. Commissioned in Portsmouth Dockyard 1749 to 1752. Long commissioning, largely because we're not at war, things are going slow, we can trundle about, we don't have to commission this frigate anytime soon. It then spends time on the Caribbean station out of Jamaica in the 1750s, having its timbers nibbled by shipworm, probably to a deleterious point, before returning to Plymouth, and then it's sent as part of the fleet that supports the sieges of Louisbourg and Quebec in Canada in the 7 Years' War, when the British are busy beating up the French in North America. It then returns to Britain and operates as a convoy escort to Lisbon, up and down the English Channel, and actually spends a bit of time in Scapa Flow, having escorted a convoy up the East Coast before coming back via Edinburgh, Dunbar, and back to Sheerness at that point. Most of the 1760s is spent as a guard ship in Larne and Carrickfergus, possibly because of the recent attack on Carrickfergus at that point. It was a bit embarrassing for the British Army and the Royal Navy, so they wanted to put a guard ship there to make sure that no one tried to do it again. It spends a lot of time, it's also possibly there because its captain has an estate just outside Larne and wants to be near it, maybe. Spends a lot of time dodging about the Irish Sea, up into the Clyde, up into the Hebrides, trundling about the Isle of Man as well. It's got a major upperworks rebuild in 1774. At that point, it sounds like the lower timbers are actually quite solid at that point, possibly because there's been a repair in the late 1750s after it returns from North America. But the upper timbers, the second fotics and up, are knackered, so they do a massive repair in 1774. And then it's sent to the North American station during the start of the American Revolutionary War. It captures some privateers, it protects some convoys, but it is an old and creaky and knackered ship. And so the Royal Navy converted it to an armed transport in 1780, and then it is eventually sold out of the Royal Navy in January 1784 to Pritzler and Company in London. And as that, it operates as the Earl of Chatham between 1784 and 1788. Up to 1787, it is under the command of Captain William Brown, who is a very successful whaler. He ends up, after being on Earl of Chatham, he commands the Butterworth expedition, which is a series of 3 ships that go to try and open trade with the Pacific Northwest of America. He gets involved in a small amount of light genocide in the Pacific Northwest and other islands in that area. He's a thoroughly unpleasant person. And he's also then later asked about his opinion on how you would get to the North Pole, and there's a pamphlet written about this is how we would get to the North Pole if we were trying to do that now, in about 1811, which is quite impressive. The ship itself, quite successful. It comes back with whale oil and whale meat on every single journey. I think 3 whales in the first year, 7 in the second, 5 in the third, and 5 again in the last season. At this point, the whaling industry is really in a boom period. The American Revolutionary War cut down whaling fleets, partly because it was dangerous to go up to the Arctic and possibly be attacked by American vessels and French vessels, but also because all the sailors who were in the whaling industry were needed for the Royal Navy. So you're going from 1782, when you have a whaling fleet in the 40s or 50s in terms of numbers. And by the time you get to 1787, 100 ships are being sent just from London. There are tens of thousands of mariners in the Davis Straits and Greenland Sea in 1787. And it is in a major boom. And then the next year, major bust, and the whole industry sort of implodes. The final voyage of the ship, March 1788, under command of the new master, Captain Peterson. Under Captain Brown, the ship was going to the Davis Straits on the west side of Greenland. When they do that from the east coast, they tend to go via Stromness and pick up their additional crew from there. When they're going to the Greenland seas, east of Greenland, and they go up past Lerwick, and they call in at Lerwick, to get last crew up to Spitsbergen and then down through the Greenland Sea. It's possible that because Captain Peterson was not as familiar with the Davis Straits, they were going to go to the Greenland Sea this year, and that's why they were coming up the east side of Orkney to go to Lerwick and pick up crew. So we are relatively certain that HMS Hind is Earl of Chatham. That's fine. We know that those ships are the same, but can it be the wreck? Size-wise, it works out quite nicely. Hind was 34 metres long, 29 metres at the keel, 9.8 metres beam, and roughly 510 tonnes. That fits with all the things we were hoping for. The build date fits with the earliest filling date. Other later timbers fit with a variety of both known and supposed likely repair sequences within repair schedule for the ship. It's built and repaired in southern and southwestern England. It's built in Chichester. It's repaired repeatedly in Plymouth and in Portsmouth, and in naval yards, which would be using a mix of timber from different forests because they're using they're buying from multiple suppliers. And it's wrecked in the right place. And Orkney Archives have a letter from a carpenter from Kirkwall to one of the Balfours, unusually complaining he hadn't been paid by one of them, who was saying, "You haven't paid for me and my men to go and break up this ship offshore and bring it ashore." So it's recorded that the Earl of Chatham was broken up and brought ashore. We're very fortunate in that, thanks to the work done by Sanday residents and Tris in particular, in terms of taking photos of the wreck when it was one complete piece, we were able to make another 3D model of it, and we can compare that to the ship plans for the class, which are from National Maritime Museum. Again, very lucky to have all these records surviving. That gives you an idea of how small, in terms of proportion to the ship overall, the piece we have. I say we, the piece that is there is, but it's still a fairly cracking bit of ship. It does work quite nicely with this ship plan. The curve there fits the whole shape quite nicely there. These lines are meant to be every 3 floors, which again fits quite nicely. And you can see that it's just starting to curve in as it comes to the bow, which mirrors the lines, the layout of the plan there. And pleasingly, the cross sections work as well, very, very nicely. Just demonstrating again how big a ship this would have been to come through. So that all fits quite nicely. There's nothing saying this last case isn't the ship. Hind was copper sheathed in 1780 with repairs in 1784. There was no copper sheathing remaining on the wreck section. However, we do have a lot of nail holes within the planking, and that's potentially probably coming from external softwood sheathing, and then the copper plating would have been nailed into that. I suspect that the reason that it's upside down, as this piece of hull was completely upside down with keel up, is because it's been turned over to rip the copper off, because that's going to be a very expensive piece of material to recover. We've also got in the keel, even though it's very badly decayed, we have got quite a lot of nail holes into that, which again suggests there's something being done there, potentially copper. And there was some mineralization of metalwork in parts of the dendro samples that was noted, which could be copper. So going back, what we have basically is a very, very lucky ship, and a very, very lucky me as well, and everyone who's involved in the project. It's been identified as the only remaining candidate for the wreck from a massive corpus of material within Sandy. It had a long and successful naval career in which it didn't get sunk, which is always nice. It had great success as a whaler for 3 or 4 seasons, which is pretty good. And even when it was wrecked, all the crew survived. 56 of the crew survived and were taken onto Sandy and then taken back to London via Kirkwall. This piece of wreck survived, was then found before it was broken apart and recovered safely back to the Heritage Centre, and on an island where people really care about their maritime heritage and are really interested in it. And I don't think that would have necessarily been the case elsewhere, not necessarily in Orkney. I think everyone really do care about their maritime heritage here, but there's such a drive to get involved that it would have been very difficult to do elsewhere. And then the archive searches and the dating led us to a point where we could actually find these little golden nuggets of information that enabled the identification of the ship. So overall, like, constant luck, which is always nice to have. That's that really. I'd just like to say thank you a huge amount to all the people who've been involved with the project. Like I say, it is a massively collaborative piece of work. I'm lucky to be able to come and chat about it myself. But huge thanks to everyone in Sandy, in particular the Sandy Heritage Group and their members, Sandy farmers who helped to recover it at the time and gave their time up to do that in quite stormy conditions. NILPS and OAS for their support and their help. HES and OIC for their support, funding and help over the course of the time. My colleagues at Wessex and my peers at Dendro Chronicle have been fantastic over the time. Wendy Robinson's given some really great conservation advice over the time, and thank you very much to all the volunteers who gave up their time for the researching workshops. It was invaluable, and we wouldn't be able to do it without their help. So thank you very much. Yeah.
Thanks, Ben. That was really interesting, and OAS are pleased to have been able to part fund some of that work. I'm happy to open the floor now to some questions. I'll do the running.
Thanks, Ben. That was brilliant. Better than the current archaeology article.
Wow.
Just one point of fact when you were talking about wreck recovery and bringing the wrecks up to the low tide mark. Mm-hmm. There's probably going to be Orcadians will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in Orkney the law is different.
With Udall law,
it comes under Udall law. So if you're a landowner, you actually own the land down to the low tide.
Yes, apologies.
So the reason for recovering the wreck up to the high tide mark is different. It just makes it easier for you to go on there and take stuff off without it getting wet. And I think that law is also on the Isle of Man and Shetland, but I'm not certain about that.
Yes, sorry, yeah, that's correct. Yes, forgotten about it all.
Thanks. Any other questions? Put your hand up.
Can you provide any dimensions for the likes of the keel and the framing and the plank widths?
Yes. So the keel is quite tricky because it's very badly decayed. So one of the issues with this bit of wreck, and one of the reasons it's difficult to work this out, is because it's been in the intertidal for so long. It's been getting wet, getting dried, getting wet, getting dried twice a day for 250 years, and so that has worn away chunks of the planking width. The plank widths we have surviving, they are roughly about 1.5 inches, about 35 centimeters, but the upper surface of them is very heavily eroded. So I think you've lost somewhere between 0.5 inch to 1 inch worth of plank thickness on that. The keel is very difficult to work out how the size of it. We've just about got the cut of the rabbit in parts of it, but not all. So I haven't got any good dimensions for the keel itself, which is a shame. The floor timbers, the biggest one of them, they're fairly consistent, but they are the biggest one, which is the best cut, which we think is possibly the master frame from it, was 4.35 meters that way. I think it was 35 centimeters width, and then molded was I think 30 or 35 centimeters again. And then the other framing timbers are all sort of 25 to 32 centimeters in box sort of thing, and we haven't got the full length of them because it's snapped off at the turn of the bilge. The longest plank was an internal plank. We did have just about both ends of that. That's 8 meters long. The external ones, I think the longest we had was 5, but we didn't have both ends of that, so we can't say for sure how. And then the width of the planks was fairly uniform-ish. I mean, it changes a little bit as you get towards ends of it. I think they're about 35 centimeters or so. They do go a little bit. The garboard strake is a little bit larger or smaller. I can't remember now. But yeah, it fits all right. The important thing was the room and space is coming out at about 24 inches or about 60 centimeters, which fits reasonably-ish with what we know about the frigates at the time. We do know that Chitty and Vernon built their 2 frigates from the 1745 establishment. They built them very slightly shorter than the other ones. It's not really clear why, but they were about 2.5 feet shorter than the other examples. And so that might account for a slightly smaller room and space than you'd necessarily expect, but it's still within a reasonable amount, I think. Sorry, was that everything you needed to know? That's what I've got for dimensions, I'm afraid.
Hi, thanks, Ben. I just wondered, it's a bit of a rabbit hole, this question, I think, but I'm sure this has raised so much interest on Orkney about ship archaeology and shipwrecks, and whether or not a lot of people now are looking very carefully at beams in their houses, and whether or not there could be any correspondence with what they are looking at now with any history of previous shipwrecks, and whether or not there might be some survey or some historic research done into that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that potentially we would like to do is there's a lot of discussion now about what to do next, and that is being led by the Sandy community. It's their wreck, it's their material. They are going to decide what to do with it. But I think one of the things that I would be very keen to see coming out of that is I don't think it's been done before, but the idea of an island wide for Sandy as a test piece. To do building recording of ship timbers within the buildings that are there. We know they are there. People have been very proud of coming and showing me pictures of the enormous masts that hold up their roofs of their crofts, and they are fantastic. Like this sort of diameter masts and other bits and bobs there. So you could certainly do a really nice community heritage thing of, here's how you record ship timbers, here's some pro forma sheets, off you go, record the timbers that you can see in your house. We'll collate that, and then potentially there's also the option for doing it would need quite a lot of funding, but to do dendro on those timbers, because you can do drill boring of dendro rather than chainsawing someone's roof up, which might be reluctant to do. I suppose if someone you don't like, but yes, you can do that, and then potentially there is the option of saying, right, well, this timber is of this date. It is slightly complicated by the fact you're only taking one dendro date, which doesn't give you a particularly rigid site chronology. You do normally want more than that from a site, but we have got a good idea of the wreck corpus, certainly for Sandy, so it will be very useful to be an interesting project to do. What some of the courses we did for NILPS last year were training people in Sandy about doing timber recording and how you do it, and we provided pro formas for them to do that. It just was, in this case, it was the timbers in front of them rather than those in the house, but those skills are now within the islands and they can do with them what they want. I'd love to be involved in it.
Thank you very much, Ben. One of the things that I was just thinking as you were saying that is that once you have a corpus of material and people who are trained to look out for it, that's something that could be rolled out much more widely, because I mean, I know there are many houses from the same period which incorporate ship's timbers. I mean, I live in one for a start, but there are many others, and it seems to me that would be a really good student project going forward. Funding is obviously always an issue, so I think that would be good. But the other thing that I think, which was my initial question I was going to ask anyway, was that obviously you've been focusing particularly on the vessel for very obvious reasons. I do just wonder if there's any strong tradition on the island of items which are washed up, because smaller objects which would have been in use. I mean, obviously it's sand and it's shifting and it's all very problematic and etc. But I think that it might be a quarry that could be investigated to see what items have been picked up from the shoreline over decades, over centuries even. Yeah. Some of which will have made it to museums, others of which will not. And there may well be a tie-in with wrecks, not specific wrecks, but with some wrecks.
Yeah, absolutely. When Alan did his survey in the 90s, where he spent a lot of the mid to late 80s and early 90s in Sandy, and he did go around and talk to people in various parts of Sandy about the material they had found or the material they had heard about and saw, their collections, or whether it had been given to the Heritage Centre. Quite a lot of material is given to the Heritage Centre for display and this sort of stuff as well. But there certainly is an option for doing that, and I think the Heritage Group in Sandy are very strong and very good at, have the skills to do that sort of thing, and I think that would be a lovely bit of work to do, for sure. Yeah.
Does anyone else have any questions? That's a nice wide aisle.
Is there any documentary material that indicates exactly what happened to the ship?
So the only piece of archive material we found specifically in Orkney archives relating to Ella Chatham is the letter from, I've forgotten his name, from the carpenter in Kirkwall to David Balfour saying, "Why haven't you paid me?" That is potentially because not all these records survive. This ship almost certainly would have gone through the Admiralty Courts of Session and the Admiralty Courts, and there would have been a paper trail for that. But the Admiralty Court records are not complete in Orkney archives.
Was it driven ashore in a storm? Do you know? Or?
Oh, sorry. The ship was so the suggestion from Walter Trell Denison's folklore bit is that it was a storm conjured up by the ship witch. So I think by the sound of it, all the records just say ashore in the Orkneys. They don't necessarily give a reason for it, but the Trell Denison's report suggests storm, and it suggests being driven ashore at Ereby, which is probably sands of Ereby, in the southern part of the Bay of Newark, and then with the information from James Sinclair, I think it's James Sinclair, the carpenter in Kirkwall, who says we were taking this ship apart offshore. The only real bit in that bit of Sandy where you're taking anything apart offshore is if it's driven up onto the Bargroona. So it seems the most likely result of that. Yeah, we haven't been fully lucky. We haven't got the full I can't remember what it's called now, the bill of sale for that wreck, and not a lot of them would survive. We know there's loads of wrecks in Sandy, but we only get a snippet, a little peephole into the antiquity court records because they just haven't survived as well as some other ones.
Do we have any more questions for Ben? No? So I'd just like to thank Ben again for coming and doing this talk to us tonight, and thank you all for coming out. So if we just want to put our hands together to...
Okay.